We're going to start. You guys ready?
I'm ready.
If you guys can just switch off your phones or silence them or throw them out the window. Welcome. Good to see you guys. Thanks for coming. We are pleased to have you all here with us today for this discussion with exhibiting artists Jenny Kemp, Cory Siegler, and our moderator Will Hutnick. I'm going to introduce Will, and then Will's going to take it over. Will Hutnick is an artist based in Sharon, Connecticut. He received his MFA from Pratt Institute and his BA from Providence College 2007. Hutnick is a 2021 NIFA Artist Fellow in Painting, as well as a grant recipient from the Durocher Foundation in 2017 and 2023, and the Foundation for Contemporary Arts in 2016. Solo exhibitions include Erie Contemporary, Pamela Salisbury Gallery, Elijah Weed Showroom, Standard Space, Providence College Galleries, One River School, the Java Project, and St. Thomas Aquinas College. Selected group exhibitions include Samuel Dorsey Museum of Art, Hollis Taggart, Erie Contemporary, 1969 Gallery, Heaven Gallery, and ColorWorks. Hutnick has been an artist in residence at Yaddo, Elizabeth Murray Artist Residency, Vermont Studio Center, Interlude Artist Residency, Hambidge Center for the Creative Arts and Sciences, Soaring Gardens Artist Retreat, DNA Artist Residency, Hewn Oaks, Stoveworks, this is a lot, Will. And he's been around. As well as a curator in residence at, is it Banaco Arte?
Yeah.
And Trestle Projects. He has curated numerous exhibitions at Spring Break, Ortega y Gasset, I never pronounced Gasset. Projects, Trestle Projects, Pratt Institute, Wassaic Project, Troutbeck, and Standard Space. His work has been featured in the New York Times, New American Paintings, and Hyperallergic, among others. From 2015 to 2020, Will Hutnick was one of the co-directors of Ortega y Gasset projects and artist-run curatorial collective and exhibition space in Brooklyn. He is currently the director of artistic programming at the Wassaic Project and a nonprofit organization that uses art and art education to foster positive social change. Please join me in welcoming all of our panel today.
Thank you, Ryan, for that introduction and for asking me to come here today. I'm really excited to have you all see this exhibition as well as to be in conversation with Jenny and Cory today. I'm going to give a brief introduction. We're going to take it off. We'll probably hold questions towards the end, unless you have a really burning question, and please just raise your hand or scream out loud at the top of your lungs, whatever your fancy is. Jenny Kemp received her BS in Art from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and her MFA in Painting from the University of Albany. Her work has exhibited both internationally and nationally, including recent solo exhibitions at Gold Montclair in Montclair, New Jersey, as well as a two-person exhibition at Transmitter in Brooklyn. Recent group exhibitions include JDJ, the Kenzie Fine Art, and Kenise Barnes, among many others. Her work has been featured in New American Paintings, the Huffington Post, 100 Painters of Tomorrow, as well as Chronogram. She is a 2015 NIFA Fellowship recipient in painting. Cory Siegler, to my left, is a visual artist based in Brooklyn who makes works centered around textiles, drawings, and artist books. She's got 2 zines on the gallery desk in the front, so if you haven't had a chance, please take a look. They're pretty amazing. Cory received her BFA in printmaking from Pratt 2008. Her work has been shown in exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum, Monopractice Gallery in Baltimore, Bard Graduate Center, and Printed Matter. She has been an exhibitor at the New York Art Book Fair, Odds and Ends Art Book Fair at Yale, and Brooklyn Art Book Fair. She has been an artist in residence at the Wassaic Project, the Tactile Art Center, and the Eileen Fisher Making Space in Brooklyn. Thank you so much for all that you both do and for being in conversation today.
Thank you.
I also want to just anecdotally share that, as Turley mentioned, I have exhibited my work a few times at ColorWorks in Troy, New York, as well as has done the Elizabeth Murray Artist Residency. Jenny's on the board of ColorWorks. And Cory and I first met years ago while you were working at Trestle in Brooklyn, where I curated 1 or 2 shows at Trestle. This was probably 2017, 19?
18.
A while ago, so yeah.
Pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, yeah. I'd love to start by talking very specifically about, before we actually dive into the two-person show and the title of the show, can you both give me kind of a brief rundown of your practice kind of in general? Because I want to talk a lot about micro and macro, right? And we're doing a lot of like inside and outside, and there's a lot of like dualities kind of apparent both within the comparison between your works, but inherent in each individual work, these dualities. So while we discuss kind of micro and macro worlds, let's talk, your umbrella pitch for the current work in the show, as well as what's your work like 5-10 years ago? Let's also connect it in time that way. Jenny, you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. Hi everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks Will, Cory, Ryan, everybody, awesome. To be here, I love this show, I love being paired with Cory. I think there's so many similarities in our work. But I'm a painter that is, I call myself an abstract painter that, coming into making the work, I don't necessarily have like a very solidified idea of what the work is going to be. Rather, the work unfolds in time as I make it, and the ideas start to emerge from there. But I would say that I do work within a visual language that I think at the root of it is kind of about a sort of fascination with the grown world and sort of natural forms, natural movements, things like that, figurative ideas as well, and color, of course, and working within sort of a limited means of like line and color to build and sort of construct these assemblies, I guess is sometimes the sort of I think about them, into a place of feeling, sort of state of being, I guess, in some way.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Can I follow up with how different was the work, if so, 10 years ago?
Yeah. So I would say that my work operates definitely like in an evolutionary kind of like continuum in that you could look at my work probably 10 years ago and see that it's sort of the same artist. I work in sort of incremental changes, but I've always worked with line and color for the most part, at least since graduate school. I would say that like my color has gotten a little bit more complex. My linear patterns have gotten so much more complex. I used to work with sort of very thinner kind of surface level lines, and these I feel like I'm kind of exploring a little bit more of like a merging of line and color that they operate as line, but also like planar, so I think that there's some merging going on.
Oh yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. All right, Cory, let's do the same question.
Okay.
And all that.
Okay, well, so I'm mainly right now, and the work in the show is all patchwork piece and quilted wall hangings. As Will mentioned, I do have like a background in printmaking and bookmaking, and my practice I still like do a lot of drawing, so I feel like that's a really big part of my practice as well. And I think like one of the reasons I'm drawn to quilt making so much, and as well as printmaking and bookmaking, is they're all sort of these like kind of long, laborious and drawn out processes, and they also all have this aspect of like technical skill that's attached to them. There's like, with each of them, with quilt making and with printmaking, there's kind of like an order of operations, and so I feel like I've been seeing a lot of like connections there. With quilt making, if you like asking about like what my work looked like 10 years ago, I think around 10 years ago is when I like started sewing. So that sort of kicked off this whole new, direction for me. I taught myself how to sew, how to quilt. I didn't, have any formal training in it. I don't have like a grandma who sews. You know, I know like
That's like everyone's
a
go-to
lot.
response.
I know, I wish I had a grandma who sews, but like, that just like isn't my story. So it's something I just sort of came to on my own, and I think the work I was making 10 years ago was mainly drawings, and they were like these very like gridded, structured, geometric like patterns, and I sort of, I had just gotten my first sewing machine, and I was making mostly things, just things for fun, like stuffed animals for like my niece, stuff like that. And then I kind of had this breakthrough moment where it's like, oh, these drawings look like quilts, like they could be quilts, and so I kind of went from there. And yeah, right now, like the work I'm making, I feel like I've been doing this deep dive sort of into like these traditional quilting techniques, but sort of pushing the boundaries of them, kind of stepping outside of like what you think of as a traditional quilt, like using a lot of cutout shapes and negative space, curved edges, but like, kind of keeping within like, using like these techniques, but using them kind of in new and different ways.
I think thank you for sharing. What's really interesting, I think, too, with your shapes is that, they are, and if people know that, there's obviously a few other works in the front space, you are still pretty much, seems like, adhering to a lot of logic around the grid, and still kind of like deconstructed rectangular square, right, with just like kind of a few pieces, that have been edited out or removed.
Yeah.
And Jenny, it's so I think it looks like the work is very much aware of the parameters and the edges. Well, and Jenny, it's like I think you pretty much have a very similar approach, right? All the lines it's rare to see, and I'd really have to like do some detective work around, but it seems like everything never cross the edge of the surface of the canvas, right? They're so defined by the logic and the internal structure of the playing fields.
Yes. And that one wasn't always, but this body, are you like meaning like they are contained in the frame?
And so yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's nothing going on.
Right. Are there I don't think there's really any moments
Not
where they
this
go
body
off.
or-
Yeah, which I think is really interesting because they actually allude to kind of continuation of time and this fractal approach of infinity, yet they are so defined by the physical parameters of the canvas. In a way that also I feel like you're alluding to this kind of infinite space, but they are actually still defined by its somewhat of a logical, like singular rectangular. So yeah, I'd love to talk to if you can maybe expand upon these ideas about like these parameters, whether or not you're like consciously setting these up or they're just emerging throughout the work.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I made a conscious decision about these works to not go beyond the frame. So there is a kind of squeezing, I think, that happens where they kind of feel like they're like at their limit, about to or need to or want to expand, but are sort of forced to fold back in on themselves. And it's funny you talk about the grid because previous to this body work, I think I adhered to the grid a little bit more, in that I was kind of interested in the rules that were grid bound. And I think I've taken what I've learned from the grid, and I still am sure there's grid things that are in these works, but I made a conscious decision to be a little bit more meandered with the work, and so there's a sort of free form in that, but then there's a sort of system-based thing happening with some rules that I've decided upon, which is like, one is to not go outside the frame, two is to continue a sort of gradation or tonal progression from one point to where that section ends, or like a new sort of growth form can't start until the other one's finished, or so, things like that, which there comes a sort of like in my mind becomes sort of like a logic that's like sort of a bio kind of logic or something that feels like it's grown or something like that versus thinner or something.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that those ideas, because I want to bring all of these kind of disparate things that I'm doing to kind of bring them back together, sort of sense of harmony or some sense of feeling of, I guess, a kind of body almost in, like in its own entity. Like it doesn't feel like it, like there are different parts, but they're all sort of somehow connected through like weaving or like, different kinds of threading. And so, some of those kinds of actions that the lines take, I feel like are so interesting to think about in relationship to your work. It's like what you physically do.
Yeah, Cory, you mentioned that you were, employing a lot of more like traditional patterns and techniques. So that makes me think of like one parameter that you're adhering to, and there's one kind of set of rules there. I'd be curious what other like parameters or rules that are you implementing, if any?
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about the grid, I mean, I'm like very, I love the grid. I haven't broken out of it yet. So I definitely feel like all my work starts with sort of the grid as the underlying structure. And the patterns that I create, I mean, it feels like a game or a puzzle or something when I'm like building these patterns. It's sort of like, starting with the grid, like how many different variations on a simple form can I make? I'll like use the same shape over and over, like a semicircle. I mean, I'll like turn it like this way or turn it that way and repeat it. And, so I kind of like having the grid as like the structure, and then sort of within that, like trying to find as much like variation as possible. But I mean, after seeing like Jenny's work, it really does, it's been sort of opening me up more, sort of pushing me to think kind of beyond that, or maybe like let go of the grid a little bit. And like, even like, the symmetry, like all my work is like very symmetrical, and what you were saying about like finding like a harmony, like I feel that way too. Like I feel like I'm always trying to, like when figure out when a piece feels done. It's like when it feels like balanced and harmonious. But you can totally do that like off the grid, and like you can have things that are in balance, but they don't have to be like symmetrical. So
yeah, but I think like what you do with your work, like it's certainly grid based, but it feels like it has so much more like generative possibilities. Like
absolutely,
it's not like, I like how I can focus on the unit of the shapes that you're thinking about, but then they operate in such amazing different configurative like visuals as a whole.
Well, and I think that the fabric is what really like helps in so much of that. Like just the tactility. It really, if it was just like, if I made like paintings like this, it probably wouldn't, it wouldn't have the same effect. Like there's so much like variation and softness, I feel like in the textiles, so it kind of brings a lot more interest.
Can you talk a little more about the material as such an integral component to breaking the grid, to like reorienting the structure? Because I even think about like not even just some internal elements and various textures, but also the whole shape, how it undulates, how it's moving. Even in this show, how we're a few inches from the wall, so the shadows become play. So I'd love to talk about or hear a little more about those like formal properties of the material.
Yeah. Well, the material, it comes from a variety of places. Most of it is like kind of found fabrics, like secondhand. People give me a lot of stuff. reuse a lot of like my own like clothing that gets like too worn out, or you know. So I just in like my studio have this huge stash of fabric, just like piles of fabric, and then yeah, and I really like that. I'm always drawn to like things that have sort of like a different texture, a different surface, or like some of them have their own pattern already like going on in the fabric, and so I really like to mix things like a lot, and I think it makes it a lot more interesting. What was the second part of your question?
I'm lost in that part.
But I also think like that because a lot of it is like fabric that has been given to me from friends and family, like things I've had around for a while. Like I think that the fabric is sort of like, it makes it more like meaningful, I guess. Like it's not like I'll like. I never make a piece where it's like, I'm gonna make a piece that was like all made from fabric, like from my mother, like I'm not doing that. I'm sort of taking this fabric in from different places and then kind of remixing it and making it into like a new thing. But at the same time, I feel like the fabric sort of is imbued with this like, this history, and I think that you can kind of like feel that in the pieces a little.
Totally. I think you definitely get the sense of honoring that time, that history.
And a lot of the pieces in this show, like you can see, like I'll have like, sometimes I have one piece of fabric and I'll be, over the course of a few years, I'll just be cutting little pieces out of it and using it in a piece, and you can see like there's fabrics that get reused in like all of these pieces, and I think that's really kind of interesting to, I don't know if other people notice it, but like I'm always like when I see like the same fabric like repeated in another work, and then I'll look back at like an older piece I made from a few years ago and it has like a little patch of something, and so it makes it a cool kind of continuing thread.
It's like an Easter egg, hunt.
Yeah, exactly.
Jenny,
Yeah.
I think you feel, I mean, I've been a fan of your work for a while, and it seems like you would almost do something similar, where there actually are a lot of recurring motifs and similar patterns that that occur between, of course, like internally within a work, but I'd say even across multiple works.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think going back to just like the idea of like the line, because line is so important in my work and such the, I think, heaviest repetitive thing. But I always kind of, I think with this body work I was trying to think about line and color kind of having equal forces. So I think, it becomes about sort of this all over plan of wanting to fill the space in a kind of big way. They're kind of smaller paintings, relatively small. These are kind of big for me. Trying to find the sort of rhythm and internal logic that begins with a sort of revelatory gesture or moment and then grows from there, and needs to kind of bring itself toward a sort of sense of whole, bound by the frame of the canvas. So with this body of work, I've been kind of thinking about the curve a lot more. The curvilinear forms are a little heavier, and I think that just comes with like a kind of fascination with the grown world, like these little curls I'm finding myself doing, and so working this kind of meandering way like opened up more improvisational things for me, which I thought was really fun and surprising, and they kind of unfold over time as well, like in a slow way, where one decision very much like makes the course for the next decision, and so on and so forth. So they're not pre-planned, although I do a lot of drawing prior to sort of figure out the rhythm of what I want to kind of do in terms of movement. And yeah, so I think the curl is kind of what's kind of bringing these into that sense of rhythm and those motifs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's some drawing materials and some sketches, but there's a lot of improvisation that occurs
Yeah.
in real time.
Yeah.
Which I find really exciting. In terms of like the color, because the gradient is so delicious and juicy and seems pretty deliberate to where it ends up, where the
Yeah.
color is. I
Yeah.
mean, do you know you're getting from A to B? Like you know that you're like, okay, well I want to get to a certain level of range or saturation?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's such a surprise usually. I mean,
Yeah.
I just started doing palette studies now, where I can kind of give myself a little bit more of an idea of where things are going, because oftentimes they're kind of a surprise. So I think about color in a way that's like, I want colors to like do something versus like be something. So like that very Albersy kind of like, sort of way of thinking about color, where it's like an active thing in the world, like it has it's like a living thing almost, right? So it's like, it's very responsive to its environment. So I think that's how I feel. And so I think about like the sensation of color beyond just sight, like trying to get something that feels like goes from cool to warm, or from front to back, or light to dark, or some like illumination, or things like that make it feel like it has some kind of sense of like vibrancy or kind of life or growth or whatever. Yeah.
They're totally, vibrating, and it's so, Albers, of course, where it's like, we're all like, Albers. But it's so interesting to see where certain ones line up, because it for me, it shifts and it vibrates on various moments, right? Like the whole thing has a buzz, but then, there's various lines that kind of come and go with a certain amount of buzz. Cory, I feel like your work does something pretty similar as well, because while you have in some of these pieces, and particularly we'll talk about these two because they're right here, like they're relatively symmetrical, or they are symmetrical, and but the color isn't right. Your color kind of like pops around. So what's going on with the teal in the upper right is the teal completely shifts when you're in the middle of the work, as well as the bottom left. So I'd be curious if you can expand a little more about color and how you think color as an active space and an active agent.
Yeah. Well, color for me is, because I'm working with textiles, it's like the colors are already like there, so it's definitely a different process. Like I don't know what I'd do if I had to like create my own color. So I think of it a lot as like found color. And when I'm like coming up with a color palette for a piece, I'll like pull like out like just tons of different scraps and things from my studio, and put it all laid out on the table, and just sort of put things next to each other and find just relationships between colors. And so it's just this process of like taking things out, taking things away, putting things next to each other, and until I kind of, like I'll sometimes have, a sort of palette in mind, or I'll get a fabric that I really love and I want to like build something around it. But it's definitely the most like improvisational part of my process, I think, is like, figuring out the colors, and and it's just sort of this moment where I feel like everything's kind of like singing together, like when you put one color next to another and you're like, oh wow, like that's, it's just like feels right. And then with the placement, it's also like, I'll always have like a sketch of the pattern that I am making. I'll have it all sketched out in pencil, but the color I kind of just will lay out as I go, and it's sort of just more intuitive, and kind of I like to have it feel like balanced and harmonious, like we were saying, and I like to sort of draw your eye like around the whole piece, like with the color, and there's sort of these little like pops or vibrations that happen. So yeah, that's
Thanks.
sort of what I think about.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little more about specifically like this exhibition because it's really tight. And I know you both shared that, you know, at the opening, some people were even curious of like, whoa, did one artist make this work?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, particularly this room and
Yeah.
the work even behind us. They're, the color palette, you know, these like lines, forms, like all the things are really singing. So I guess I'd be curious of, how, I think Jenny, you actually mentioned this a little bit ago, but I'd be curious upon, especially, you know, you also came back today with a fresh set of eyes for the show, like, what are your impressions about being paired with one another? Like, what's maybe, what are you thinking about that might be new within your work, or what are you maybe hoping to explore now that you're paired with one another?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, totally. I mean, we talked about this all at the opening and how, like, just this room particularly, like that pairing is just bonkers to me. Like, I just feel like there's, you know, this one is too, but that one just like, I don't know, it just feels like they were kindred, meant to be together.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think like, you know, and I had the pleasure of visiting you at Mosaic before the exhibition, so we chatted and stuff prior. And I got to see a little bit of your working process, which is really great. And I love this idea of the seamlessness, you know, like the show title and how that might mean different things for both of us. And because I think I had this realization that like maybe my painting process is a little bit more like I don't know, like a tapestry, like more like a sewing thing, versus like painting thing because of this kind of slow linear connections and things like that. And so it got me thinking about like, you know, the line as a thread as it takes action in the work and our palettes I think are crazy similar. I think we both have an affinity for like a combination of like sort of muted colors and saturated colors together to make that singing thing that you're talking about. When I think it creates like a nice kind of warmth and just like joy and like comfort on some level, or something that feels like you wanna, you know, I don't know, touch it, hold it, whatever, wear it. And then I think also thinking about our love for maybe edge. I think like we both have this kind of like, as it pertains to like the idea of seamlessness, you know, I think like we both finesse our edges a lot, so I think that that's interesting.
Yeah.
To kind of think about how we start and stop a form in this kind of precise way, and wanting to kind of present the work in a way that sort of doesn't show the like the messy underparts. You know what I mean?
And it seems like also a very singular, like microscopic view, right? You're really like, you know, as much as there are these expansive worlds, I think you're both really like holding our hands to a certain extent and saying like, look here, slow down, be present here. You know, Cory, when I think about that one in the back, where like for here, like the blue line is also an internal blue line, but that navy one is, you know, pretty dark and maybe the darkest element, but also exterior.
Yeah.
So that one is, I think, very more specifically like this pattern could go on forever, but I am purposely choosing to stop it and to direct your eye to stop in a singular moment. Maybe in a similar way, right, Jenny, that we talked about how your forms are so aware of their physical parameters against the canvas. But Cory, I'd be curious for you when you first saw the work together, but as well as if it's conjuring up or if you're thinking about new things, maybe because of the pairing with Jenny.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just what Jenny said, like I was kind of like just totally blown away by seeing them together. Like it's really like they're so spot on, and I mean, you know, Jenny and I didn't even know each other before this show, and so like it was all Ryan like putting us together, which is he's like a magician, you know. And yeah, just the way that he like, yeah, the pairings in the show, like just the relationships, like they just seem like they're all like buddies, you know, like they just like already like knew each other, like before we knew each other.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, yes, the word seamlessness is, you know, I think with like fiber arts based shows, it's like there's a lot of these sort of like fiber like analogies, you know, you can make like
As a title?
yeah,
or
as a title, you know, but I think like, so there's obviously, yeah, like seamlessness in like talking about like sewing and quilting, but I think it makes it a lot more interesting when you know, bring in like the seamlessness between the relationships and the work. So yeah, I just think, I don't know, it was really exciting to me to see this work together. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's really like seeing Jenny's work has been making me like kind of think about new possible directions for my own work, and kind of yeah, find like making pieces that are not so like, you know, so symmetrical, like kind of going a little more like organic, or I mean, when you were saying like you don't sketch like these before you make them, like that's crazy. Like, I don't know how you make these paintings.
It's a lot of drawing on the actual surface
Yeah.
itself. Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of drawing. Actually, I come from a drawing background more than a painting background, so I think that's why my obsession with line is like still there. But there is a kind of, yeah, there's like this traverse like between something that is like freeform or what, you know, or improvisational, and the kind of system that they have to kind of find themselves to become.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of figuring out on the surface of the painting, actually, which I think there is inevitably a sort of tension where it's like, you know, because they have such a sort of precision finished end, that it, because I do want them to feel like they're sort of still moving on some level, you know, like color I think really wants to make these move and sort of set these into motion, and like, and I want them to feel like they have a sense of time in their making, but also that they're still like about to still like, you know, that they're still in action of something on some level, like they're still in transition of some kind, you know, like kind of thinking about like time and the kind of weirdness of time, how things grow, and like, you know, and how time passes in a warped way, and you know, like these kinds of like abstract ideas of time and growth. But I think we should do a collaboration actually.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were gonna stop talking until someone said it, so. Great. Yeah, I mean, I totally get all those notions of time. There's like a pretty slow unfolding of time, both with line and color, with these very kind of subtle gradients that are kind of melding into one another. And Jenny, when I think of other moments of yours that are more of like kind of that little peekaboo, as well as kind of the central kind of mirrored form, that oval egg in the center, like they actually feel like different moments of time. Whether that's like receding in the back, or that's coming forward, or so I'd be curious, you know, if how purposeful maybe if you're thinking about various moments of time and things that are unfolding over time, or because there's just maybe not with all of them, but even here, right, if you think about this that piece to the right, that little eye drop, also is a moment where you're like specifically slow down because that's so different than other elements of the work.
Yeah, like that little curl that you're talking about.
The little curls to the right, yeah. There wasn't a question there, but I just...
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think like when it comes to these different ways that they assemble themselves something that can do something that's like a wild hair or something. It feels like it's breaking out of its own system and sort of becoming a new thing, or you know, like a kind of to be continued sense of time. Like I don't know, in any of these, maybe you don't see it, but like in other ones, there's something that like will sort of wrap around another line or sort of curl around.
Like the upper right corner, right?
Yeah, like
You're
that
kinda-
one. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that to me feels like a kind of like a sense of like a to be continued something is, you know, emerging
Yeah.
on some kind of level, and
That's interesting.
wanting to, you know, and that, you know, sort of starts to make me think about the next painting and what I want to try to do from there. So that, yeah. I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, totally. Yeah, I totally actually got this to be continued approach, because especially this slow unfolding of time and then one or two kind of moments where it's like you're winking at us, even a little more so. I see such a strong wink there, where then maybe that's just the micro world where your next painting or your next body work expands from there.
Yeah, like the element of surprise, I think I'm trying to like fold into the work. Yeah.
For me, it also feels like a similar, to a certain extent, framing device, maybe, Cory, how some of your found patterns are used sparingly within the work. You know, particularly that one in the back that there's really only like one or two found patterns throughout there, so it seems like a similar window into another world by sparingly using kind of found fabric or
Well, I feel like with the patterns, the found patterns that I do use, that I like to keep them pretty like subtle, because I feel like there's already so many layers of pattern going on in the work. So I don't, I just like to have these little kind of pops, and then have a lot of solids, but the solids also have, you know, they all have their own like texture too.
totally. They're like generating their own pattern from your like the horizontal or vertical lines, like that stitch, but also the materiality of them, you know, so quote unquote single color is there's so many variations within that one.
And this was the first one, or no, this one and the other, the large one in the hallway with the orange, those are the first ones where I really started to use like the quilted stitched line as another like element. Like if you look at like this one in the back, it is quilted, but the quilted lines are in the seams, so they're hidden. It's called Stitch in the Ditch for any of you quilters out there. So it's a particular way of quilting within your stitch line, so that the quilted lines kind of disappear. And I had been doing that in my work intentionally because I wanted to really just highlight like the piecework and the pattern. And with these newer pieces, I was like, okay, I gotta bring like the quilted line into it, because it adds like this whole other kind of element on top of things. And so of course, like I did like kind of the simplest thing, just like these quilted lines that are just straight 1-inch lines. So it was sort of me starting to dip my toes into that, because that's like a whole other world to explore. It's like you could be, you know, I could have like the patterns and then have a whole other pattern kind of laid on top of it, just with the stitches. So
I think it's, I mean, I love that approach. I think it's, it vibrates too in a new way. And especially varying the horizontal, the vertical. There's something like digital or like tiptoeing to a digital culture or digital aesthetic that's happening, which makes me think of actually some of your drawings and your zines and some of that logic. I have 12,000 more questions, but I would love to open it up if anyone here has any questions.
I have an observation.
Yeah.
Because I'm staring at this wonderful work. first of all, you're both wearing plaid.
Yeah.
And it's not an obvious thing to wear. I don't think anyone else in the room is wearing plaid. But also, Cory, you look like you are part of that piece. And Jenny, that's an uncanny relationship with
I
that.
always match my paintings. I don't even paint you every single time. And it's like, you look like you're painting.
This is like my favorite shirt, and it's getting pretty threadbare. So probably pretty soon it'll end up in one of these pieces.
Could I ask a question about color? Jenny, you look like you spend a lot of time deciding between maybe 3 or 4 colors and how they're going to, gradate and sort of give you a sense of, I don't know if that's meant to be shadow or more of a heaviness or a meatiness to the shapes. And also, I want to congratulate you on your handiwork. I cannot do straight lines like that. It's amazing. And Cory, I think you said something interesting in that you get to choose your colors by bringing samples over to compare them, whereas you have to actually mix up your colors. So could you maybe each speak about how you arrive at your color ideas?
Sure. I feel like there's a lot of ochre colors in this particular show, and that's something that I think I chose for, one, it's like an interesting mid-tone range that offers a lot of variation in different directions in terms of temperature, intensity, and things like that. So keep looking at this painting for some reason, but there's other paintings in the show that have more of a kind of ochre palette, and I've been kind of obsessed with ochres for some reason. I think that it has something to do with, again, that kind of like mid-tone range and its kind of mutability of becoming other things. It has a little bit of a cartoony-ish to it too. I don't know. I feel like a lot of like my sort of scribble in your lines come from like early like childhood, like sort of like visuals and things like that. But when it comes to like mixing my colors, I start with one and then it becomes a kind of I mix them all in the same pot. So you might imagine that I have like a ton of different mixtures everywhere, but I just sort of operate from one pot where I'm constantly shifting and moving it. And so the stakes become kind of high-ish, right? If I could screw it up, I have to kind of start things over because I'm just not, you might think I'm organized, but I'm not as organized as my paintings might look, because if I had to kind of mix so many different colors that were so close in range, I'd sort of totally forget. I wouldn't be able to kind of like come back to where I needed to go and remember. But sometimes that's good for me because it's like a practice in sort of memory. So sometimes I think about these as like these kind of memory exercises where, how many, like what's the count of the color that I'm adding and how is it increasing, and another part of your question that I missed? I forget.
No, your paintings are so perfect in some sense. They almost look printed in a way that they're so perfectly put down.
Yeah.
Almost if you had the idea so clearly in your
Yeah.
mind that you just went for it and just painted it out. But surely you must be making mistakes and correcting colors.
Definitely, yeah, like, for sure. Like, so the underpaint, like I just finished a residency and it was like weird for me because I had to like expose, myself and there's so many people around looking at what you're doing, and it's just great, but it's just not like, typically, in the studio, I feel like it's, you make these decisions without feeling like people are kind of looking, but the underpaintings are kind of messy, actually, and so something that I realized in the residency was like, I really am kind of enjoying the weirdness of these underpaintings. They, they're drawn out, and then the line between the fat lines get painted, and then the whole thing gets sort of covered with these different kind of like messier washes to create like an even tone across, so I don't have to like paint over and over and over each one of those like linear patterns, which creates a kind of interesting texture. So now I'm kind of thinking like, because there is like such a precision to my line, and it looks like so laborious, and I think it is, but it's like more of a, it's a pleasure for me to do it, you know, it feels pleasurable for me to kind of like execute the line and kind of start from a messy place and bring it to this kind of refined place. Yeah, so I think the precision end of it becomes something that just feels more natural to me than anything else, because I've just been kind of doing it for a little while. And
Yeah, another question over here?
I have a question to
Yeah,
follow up
yeah.
on that,
Sure.
because I realized that I'd thought of these paintings as each of these fat things being like painted separately,
yeah.
but now from what you've just expressed, it's more of the dark line is coming on top of what was a form, a large solid form.
No, you're the original
Oh,
idea was
okay.
right.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay,
So the
okay.
underpainting is the darker, like in this case, the darker color or the light blue color in that section, and then so those lines are getting painted first, but the balloony lines are drawn first. So it's like,
Okay.
so then I paint the.
So the dark lining is space in between the paint
Mhm.
and not on top of the paint.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what you were.
Yeah,
talking
that
about?
was
Yeah.
my question.
Okay. Yeah.
And then Emma, I had a question for you about your patterning. If you have very strict sort of rules or formula for where the different colors or textures will appear, or if it's kind of done intuitively and it's kind of a random pattern.
Yeah, I don't really have rules for how I'm placing the fabric. That's sort of, I just sort of decide more intuitively. Like I do like decide it like in the beginning of the makings of the piece though. Like I'll lay it all out, you know, on my table, and I'll kind of, the way I work is like horizontally on the table, and I even in my studio I have a ladder. I'll like get up on the ladder so I have enough height and can kind of like look at it as a whole, you know, and so I'm like, it's really silly looking. I'm like up and down the ladder because I'm like moving pieces of fabric around, and then I'll take things away or put like, you know, different colors until it kind of feels right. So it's, it's the color is not,
Sort of pre-programmed.
it's not pre-planned, but then once it's sort of set, then I start sewing it, and that's sort of it. I actually, the piece in the hallway, this is the first time this happened, but I sewed it backwards, like than I had intended to. Like all of the, it's these little like kind of capsule shapes, this orange piece in the hallway, and they're all like a circle with kind of like an arc around it, and I had meant them all to be like reversed. And then it was only until I sewed them all that I was like, oh shit, like, and then I was like, oh, it's fine. Like, it still works. So that was sort of a nice lesson for me too, of being like, oh, you know, it's okay to not have like full control. So.
It's a nice lesson of letting go.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
I have a question about your use of the blue outline, which
Yeah.
is so beautifully integrated into the whole throughout.
Yeah.
But whether that was part of the plan from the beginning, or whether it's more a function of having to contain raw edges of fabric, and whether you ever rebel against needing to outline your fabric in an outline or a border.
Yeah, well it definitely was a plan from the beginning. Like it's in quilting, it's called binding. And I love the look of binding. I really do, you know, I like having that kind of clean finished little the edge, and it is an opportunity to kind of introduce another color. And but there are other techniques where you don't have to bind your quilts, but I do. I just really like the look of it, and I love, like, you know, because it is all like there's the loose unfinished ends underneath, and then there's something really satisfying to me. Like, my favorite part is putting the binding on, and it's so satisfying to just like, it's like, that's it. It's just like clean and perfect. But yeah, so this one though, I think might be the first one where I used a binding color that isn't actually in the like interior of the piece at all, and I definitely like I just had this blue, and I just like really was like, yeah, I love that blue. So
It's got such a stained glass vibe.
Yeah.
To like, for that shape and the form, and it to be such a strong outline.
And it like really shapes these negative spaces.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny you say stained glass. I'm actually taking a stained glass workshop later this summer, and I'm really excited.
Ooh, I wanna see that.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny and Cory, so much for
Thank you so
this
much.
conversation, for sharing your work with us.
Thank
Thank you everyone for